Catching criminals is no easy job.
We're here to arrest you.
But it's even harder when the criminal is a cop turned bad.
He liked having power and authority and status and a uniform.
When the police officers who were sworn to protect us turned to rape,
she was actually meeting a monster.
Murder.
What happened in those minutes or moments or seconds where he chose to go and get a weapon?
Robbery.
He knows where the money is, he knows where the drugs are.
And even blackmail and poisoning. All just to get what they want. In this series, I'm enlisting the help of 3 experts.
That man should stay behind bars for the rest of his life.
2 senior officers who've put hundreds of offenders behind bars.
He was in such a lofty position that he thought he was untouchable.
And a psychologist who can analyse the criminal mind.
He's a narcissist. He doesn't feel remorse.
In this series, I'll be investigating why some cops put themselves on the wrong side of the law, abuse their power, and commit horrific crimes. This is the story of one of Australia's top police officers gone rogue. He was known for putting drug traffickers behind bars, but this cop was playing both sides. On the 2nd of June 2008, Mark Standen, the Assistant Director of Sydney's New South Wales Crime Commission, was arriving for work as normal. Only on this day, as his colleagues approached, they held a police recording device.
We're here to arrest you for conspiring to import into Australia a commercial quantity of border control precursors. Do you understand that? I'm not, mate, I'm deadly serious. Do you understand that? Yeah? No, it's not. Do you understand that? You're now under arrest.
The recording device had captured the dramatic fall from grace of one of Australia's top cops, who'd spent 30 years fighting crime. How had he fallen so far, so fast? The story begins in 2003. International criminal gangs known as cartels are taking advantage of lax border controls to ship their product into every country they could reach. In Australia, Mark Standen was one of the leading cops in the international war on drugs. His job was his life. He revelled in combating the biggest organised crime networks at home and around the world. But his work brought him into contact with informants working for the cartels, and with millions of dollars at stake, the line between right and wrong began to blur. This is Detective Inspector Paul Watt of Australia's Federal Police. He was one of the cops who knew Standen well and has agreed to talk to me about his former brother in blue.
Mark was a very experienced police officer, a very experienced drug investigator. He'd been with the Australian Federal Police for over 20 years and had reached the rank of Detective Superintendent. He was very widely respected, very charismatic guy. People were drawn to him and people generally respected what he had to say because he was very knowledgeable. He knew who the crooks were in Sydney especially, and a lot of them knew him through his work.
In the early 2000s, one of the most wanted men in Australia was an international drug trafficker called James Kinch.
Kinch was a target of an investigation which Mark led. It was a significant ecstasy MDMA importation syndicate operating mostly out of the Netherlands. And Kinch was charged with some serious offences. I believe there was over 200 kilos of ecstasy pills seized. And then during the compilation of evidence, I understand Mark developed a bit of a relationship with Kinch.
Standen then set about trying to turn Kinch into an informant. To help explain how this works, I've called upon former Detective Chief Inspector Howard Groves.
So he's obviously approached him, like I would have done. I'd have gone to him and said, right, this is what we've got. Surveillance or whatever of you doing X, Y, and Z. we know if we charge you with that, you're going to go to prison for a long time. So it's a question of, what are you going to do for me? It's not uncommon for police officers to try and cultivate what you call an informant. That's standard practice. There is a process that you have to go by. You have what you call a source unit, and then normally the informants are managed by a completely different group. So you shouldn't be an investigator investigating a particular crime, and then you are managing the informant at the same time.
The actions of the Dutch cartel that Kinch was part of was starting to make the Australian press. It was journalist Charles Miranda that was covering the story and unearthed the critical link between Standen and Kinch.
Mark Standen became an handler for Kinch, and all of a sudden there was an unholy alliance formed. And from all accounts and evidence that was given in court later, Kinch was a lovable rogue, and he got on like a house on fire with Mark Standen. The two built a fantastic rapport, and Standen's bosses were loving it. They were going, oh, you get on with them so well, you control them, let him get back to his Dutch criminal life, but of course be our informer.
The Australian Federal Police's plan was to allow Kinch to continue to act as a drugs middleman, as long as he was feeding them information about the shipments coming into the country.
Standen, to his credit, would just say, he's given me little tips. Whether they were erroneous or real, it's not clear, it's never been known, it's never come out in any evidence, but it was enough for Standen's bosses in this country to go, okay, keep going, keep working him as a contact.
The Australian police thought Standen had flipped Kinch to help their war on drugs, but in fact, it was the other way round.
Obviously, Standen was in a position where he could see the amounts of money that were being made by the people that were involved in drugs. There was that much money floating around that the temptation was probably too great for him, and he probably was the type of person who felt, I know enough, I know how to avoid being caught.
Was there any signs that he wasn't the good cop that everyone else thought he was?
$900,000 was recovered from Kinch. You would say that that's the proceeds of crime, but they'd managed to strike a deal whereby Kinch would keep 300,000 of that 900, and that was for the purposes of letting the police understand how that money was laundered over a period of time. The problem with that was the moment he handed that money to Kinch, it was never seen again.
So he just basically took that?
Yeah, but that's, you know, a lot of people who did reporting at that time said that that's an unusual thing to do. Why would you give somebody as much money as that?
What Standen didn't know was that Kinch and the drug cartel were already under surveillance by the authorities in the Netherlands. Former Detective Chief Superintendent Sue Hill has worked on many cases involving forces in several countries. She has first-hand experience of how local and international police forces team up on major operations. So how were the Dutch involved in this?
The Dutch authorities were already on the case of a drug cartel in the Netherlands that was sending and exporting pseudoephedrine from the Netherlands into Australia. And they knew a fax had been received in an internet cafe, and that fax was sent to someone called Bill Gilarate.
Who's Bill Gilarate?
So he's in Sydney, and he's a food wholesaler. So the Dutch police told the Australian police about what they've heard, and then the Australian police bugged Gilarate's phone, and this is what they heard.
G'day, mate. How you going? With yourself? Oh, not bad. Everything all right? Yeah, okay. You on target for your trip? Yeah.
So who was that?
Mark Standen.
Can you imagine what the reaction would have been hearing that phone call that Mark Standen is now talking to a potential big drug trafficker?
You wouldn't believe it, would you? Someone in that position, they would be astounded, shocked, beyond belief. My God, how do you process that?
I was quite shocked, and I've identified his voice immediately because I knew him, and I'd known him for over 10 years at that point. So I knew there and then that this was something that could be quite serious for us. The initial presumption was that it may well be an informer, police handler type relationship, but it became evident very quickly that that wasn't the case.
Mark Standen was one of Australia's top police officers, but his colleagues were about to discover his personal links with drug traffickers. In 2007, in Sydney, Australia, one of the country's top cops, Mark Standen, has become a prime suspect in an international drug trafficking investigation. Although Standen doesn't know it yet, police have intercepted a call to his phone from an Australian businessman who they have just been informed is in contact with a Dutch drug cartel.
G'day, mate. How you going? Good yourself? Oh, not bad. Everything all right? Yeah, okay. You on target for your trip?
The Australian businessman was Bill Jalalati, and he'd known Mark Standen for years. But why was he involved with an international drug cartel?
Bill's business was an importer, so you're thinking he's bringing stuff in to the country. Yes, he has a warehouse, which would mean things can be stored. He didn't have a criminal record. His wife had been a police officer before, and she had worked with Standen.
The Australian Federal Police had thought Jalalati was the main contact for the cartel and had spotted the opportunity to make large sums of money on the side. But they slowly start to realise that Standen was most likely the instigator.
Bill was a pretty, straightforward, simple guy. He was just running around distributing meat around Sydney. And I've got very little doubt that Mark is the one that lent on Bill through that relationship. And that Bill was a bit of a gullible guy. He really admired Mark and respected him, and I think Mark absolutely played on that.
The police had to tread carefully when gathering evidence about one of their own. Not least because they knew that Standen would claim Jalalati was his informant. That meant 24-hour undercover surveillance of their new prime suspect, who had once been their trusted colleague and friend. So how did they bug Mark Standen?
The phone they issued with him, they could bug it and they could use it as a microphone. So when he was talking to someone, they could record everything he was saying.
So they were listening all the time?
Absolutely.
We had to really treat him very differently to the way we would normally treat someone because he was such an expert in our investigative methodologies. He knew exactly how we operated, how we target criminals. Every step we took had to have that sort of operational security in mind. We never used his name.
Did they come up with a code name?
They called him Rupert, as in Rupert Bear. He's not a big guy, Mark. And I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's why that stuck.
So why would such a senior cop with a distinguished career risk everything to go from law enforcer to drug dealer? It's a question I put to psychologist Serena Simmons. When you get somebody as high up and as senior in his position as Mark Standen is it usual to find someone like that who can go then and commit crime like he did?
I would hope that people who attain his position of power and leadership are not doing things like that. You're looking at someone who believes they're better than anyone else, that they know how things work behind the scenes, that they are able to cover their tracks. So I don't think he thought that he would ever be caught because he was the one that was essentially pulling the strings.
But once the police started looking into it, Standen's motives for turning to crime became more apparent.
His financial position was certainly not a strong one and was indicative of someone who had had a series of debts throughout his life.
But it was well paid though, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. I mean, the position he was in when we investigated him was Assistant Director at the New South Wales Crime Commission. So that was a high-paying job. It was certainly well above what your average police officer was making. It was well over $250,000 a year, with a car and phone and all that sort of stuff.
So you would say none of these things that happened was something you could foresee?
I wouldn't say that. I think there were rumours that he had a gambling problem, that he'd accrued some gambling debts.
There were other expenditures that Standen had wanted to keep quiet, especially from his wife, Lynn.
We know that he was having an affair and that he was trying to maintain a particular lifestyle for that woman that he was having an affair with. So he would buy her lots of nice jewellery, he wanted to take her on holidays, and he got in debt to do that.
I think he called the girl who's having an affair with Princess.
It says a lot, doesn't it?
It does, I think it does. The funny thing is, I read about this, that he actually was blaming his wife for she's spending too much money, he's got crippling debts and all, but really it's him is the issue.
Absolutely, and of course he's going to do that. This is someone who is going to sit back and blame everyone else in their life for the problems that they're experiencing, because it's nothing to do with them. He's a narcissist, it's everyone else's fault. So he would blame his wife who is completely innocent in this situation.
Mark Standen was indulging in a lifestyle that was way beyond even his very high police salary. The police had countless recordings of Standen, desperately seeking advance payments for his part in this criminal enterprise. We've got a clip here, and he's talking to Bill Jalalati, and you can hear how desperate he is for money. He's asking for like an advance off Jalalati. Have a listen to this.
Mate, is anything happening on that deposit front? Because I know nothing's surfaced there.
I got that last night.
Yeah, because it takes like 24 hours to happen.
No, I'm direct depositing it today.
Yeah, but they go in overnight, see, so it still won't go until tomorrow.
It sounds like somebody, to me, who literally, whether it's gambling or whatever, he needs money now. He can't even wait till tomorrow.
Yeah, he's utterly desperate at this point, and I think obviously this is going back to the fact that he's in debt, he's gambling all the time, he has a wife and family at home and a mistress, so he's juggling all of these things. What's also interesting for me psychologically is this is when you start to trip up, when you're desperate. This is where the sloppiness might kick in. He's not thinking about the consequences, he just wants that money straight away.
But once you're on that spiral, this is where you end up. As his desperation for money grows, Standen starts to throw caution to the wind. In January 2007, he ends up jetting off with Bill Jalalati on an international trip to meet drug trafficker James Kinch.
Standen, Bill, they go off to Dubai to have a chat with Kinch. And obviously that conversation and things that happened there is also part and parcel of the evidence gathering that the police would do, because they'll be thinking, why has Jalati, who's not necessarily deemed to be anybody other than a legitimate importer, going off to Dubai with a senior police officer to meet up with somebody who was up to it in drug supplying and money laundering?
It sounds like to me that sometimes to gather evidence, you've got to let them get their hands dirty enough so you've got enough evidence, because you only get probably one go at it, especially with one of your own.
Imagine you want to build a wall. You've got to put bricks in it, yeah? And you've got to go all the way to the top, from the bottom up. It's the same thing with evidence. You build your case with different bits.
This evidence gave the investigators something to directly question Standen about when he was eventually arrested 17 months later.
Under what circumstances did you meet James Kinch in Dubai?
We met fairly briefly. We had dinner at the Marrakesh restaurant. We had dinner, had a drink at the bar.
You instigated that meeting?
Kinch and I, essentially.
After we'd met with Kinch in Dubai, they talked about how much the product was worth. They were using figures like 100,000 per kilo. They both sort of discussed that they would get $1 million each, and Mark discussed how he wouldn't just be able to get $1 million put in his account because the Police Integrity Commission would be asking questions about how he suddenly came into all this money, and he talked about how he would potentially use a business overseas to try and launder the money back into Australia.
Following the Dubai rendezvous, authorities suspected Kinch had flown back to Amsterdam to discuss Standen's proposed deal with the drug cartel.
Kinch is in the Netherlands, and what he's doing, he's planning and preparing for the drugs to come into Australia and through the food warehouse owned by Bill Gelati.
What was Standen actually trying to import into the country?
So he was trying to import 300 kilos of drugs, pseudoephedrine, which was worth a street value of $120 million.
Whoa, so that's big. Pseudoephedrine is for crystal meth, and the amount of people who die from misuse of crystal meth in Australia and in other countries, and he's going to flood the streets with that.
Yeah, shocking. He's meant to be there as a law enforcement agent to protect the public.
Standen was now leading a double life as an international drug trafficker as well as a senior narcotics cop.
Mark Standen was a very smart guy, make no mistake, and he was a major player internationally in law enforcement. And there was great evidence of him chairing these meetings with some of the most powerful law enforcement bodies in the country, including from the UK, from Japan, the FBI in the United States. And they would sit in these offices with Mark Standen chairing the meeting, and they would ask him, what cartels should we be focusing on? And I mean, it's unbelievable to, it's just unbelievable, but he would obviously give the names for the cartels which were rival to his own.
As Standen continued living his double life, the police investigation into him carried on gathering evidence, including how the cartel would pay Standen for his work through Jalalati. We've got some of the conversations actually recorded from what the police caught. Have a listen to this.
Hey mate, we're going to need to give you a Christmas ham, a nice Christmas ham, you know, our famous Christmas hams, the best in the planet.
A few days later, police listened into another conversation between Standen and Jalalati in Jalalati's car.
Your hands there and your presence on the top. So just be careful. Stop. There. The big one box got a ham in it. Oh, really? Yeah. Oh. Okay. Yeah. Well, good Christmas present. A cheap one from me and a good one from my friend.
What's going on there?
In essence, it was a transaction. Cash and a ham being handed over. That's basically what it was. But Jalalati was trying hard to not make it sound like as if there was anything nefarious going on. So he keeps going on about the ham, and at the same time, you know, Standen knows that there's going to be money handed over at some point.
So the main thing he wants is the cash, but he's saying, I'm only sending ham, but there's going to be cash with it.
Because he thinks by talking about the ham, if there's anybody listening to it, it's not going to be anything to worry about.
It definitely doesn't sound like a seasoned criminal.
No.
With mounting debt, Standen pushed forward with his part in a drug trafficking plot worth millions, involving criminals on 3 continents. The Dutch drugs cartel had asked their supplier in Pakistan to ship the drugs directly to Australia. A huge amount of drugs was due to arrive into Australia, and it was being organised by one of the country's top cops. A network of drug traffickers is planning to deliver a huge shipment of illegal drugs into Port Botany in Sydney. And one of the country's top cops is part of the plot.
It was supposed to be crystal meth that they were bringing in. And at that time, there was an awful lot of issues in Australia. So in many ways, they would have been importing death. And Standen knew that this was a big problem for the Australian police.
It was now time for the first run. The plan was for the illegal pseudoephedrine to be transported from Pakistan in bags of rice, which could be imported into the country in huge shipping containers and stored in Bill Jalalati's warehouse. But they were taking no chances, so the first shipment that arrived on the 4th of October 2007 will be a dry run, without drugs, to check for inspections.
So that dummy run went well. It got imported, went through the paperwork, and off it went into Bill Jalaalati's warehouse. So as far as Standen, Kinch and Jalaalati were concerned, they're on, this is on, we can do this, we've got away with a dry run, let systems go.
So according to the evidence, the massive shipment of rice with the drugs were about to leave the docks off Pakistan, and there was great excitement. There was great chatter between Kinch and Standen. You know, the toys are coming soon, or it's all very exciting.
And in April 2008, the ship finally sailed into harbour. But it wasn't plain sailing. Standen's dream payday shipping container was stuck at customs.
When the container arrived, it was on the wharf, and instead of receiving the original bill of lading, Bill received a ransom note, basically from the company in Pakistan that had sent the shipment, which was some 400 and something bags of rice. And the ransom note basically said that the Dutch people who had organised it hadn't paid them, and that he would not release the original bill of lading until he'd been paid. So this created a bit of panic.
With the rice shipment stuck at customs and Jalaalati becoming increasingly anxious, Standen would have to take charge of this situation. Otherwise, his dreams of a big payday were over.
What I'll do now is I'll ring the surveillance guy. See what he's doing. If he lines it, wouldn't need to. Unless I already knew the connection. But yeah, the only thing that I don't know about. But that gives them too much credit. They're never that good, you know?
Bill was getting very nervous, and he said he was worried for Mark, and that police or somebody would be able to piece the story together and connect Mark into it. And Mark sort of brushed it away and said, oh no, they're not that good. And that kind of incentivised the team a little bit.
Standen continued to use his influence to try and divert customs' attention away from his drug shipment from Pakistan and into other cargo he claimed to have been tipped off about.
Mark Standen.
Hey, Mark, Steve.
Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Good, thanks. Yourself?
Not bad, thanks for calling back. I just got a bit of info up on the task here. All quiet in the western front, is it?
Yeah. As far as we know, we had a couple of possible last week with offshore.
Yeah. Steve, we've got an informer who has a very good history with us. He lives in Europe.
Yeah.
All he knows is that it's crystalline DMA and it's in a consignment of bath salts from China.
What's he doing there?
Well, he's trying to get the customs officers to look at something else, to allow their shipment, which they think contains drugs, to come in and not get obviously searched. So he's mentioning a ruse for them to look at something else.
And also lying about on other containers to try and get them to look at that.
Throw them off the scent. So Standen is doing everything in his powers to throw them away from the consignment that he thinks has got drugs coming in.
Unbeknown to Standen, whilst he and his co-conspirators are trying to get their shipment safely through customs, the police are way ahead of him.
This container went to a quarantine site, and that's where we sort of interjected, and we had that container through a trusted customs contact moved to a site where we could open it up. We literally opened up 430 something bags of rice and examined every single one of them, and then had to re-stitch them all back up. This took a couple of days. Obviously we didn't find the precursors because they were never put in.
The police searched a container and there were no drugs. So basically what happened is they've been double-crossed. So the Pakistanis haven't put the drugs in.
Standen and his co-conspirators finally sorted the paperwork for their container and it was allowed through. They were completely unaware that their shipment was just rice with no drugs, or that they were now under continual surveillance.
And so this massive batch of rice turned up in Australia. It was tracked, and then very comically, because there were cameras and recording devices everywhere, these men were in absolute panic mode as they went through sack after sack after sack for hours and hours, days, looking for the drugs, and could not understand why in this huge consignment of rice there was no drugs. And of course then there were heated phone calls which at this stage were all being tracked and monitored to say, what the hell, what's happened, where are the drugs?
So I'm a little confused here. I need Howard to help me out. How is that a crime if there's no drugs? Surely there's got to be evidence.
Let me try and explain it simple. Let's say I want to kill you, and I go and I get two people and I say, he leaves his home at 10 o'clock every morning, drops his kids off at school. Let's say the police get informed or get some information from an informant to say somebody's trying to kill Will. Would they wait for you to be at the school with your kids before they come and try and apprehend those people concerned?
Right.
They would have to have interrupted that gang or that individual and take them out before they get to you. Right? Should the police walk away and say, oh, well, he didn't kill Will, so, OK, we're fine, you can go, you can do what you want to do. No. They still conspire to kill you.
Right.
It's the same thing with the drugs.
So conspiracy is a serious offence?
Yes, because you have planned with a group for a common purpose to do something, and their common purpose was to bring drugs that were illegal, that were going to kill people, into the country for their own financial gain.
Mark Standen thought he was too clever to get caught, but things were now starting to unravel for him pretty quickly. It was an absolute cock-up, you know, he got double-crossed, you know, there was people listening and watching the whole time. So even though he thought he was ahead, he was still way behind.
And that's where arrogance does trip you up in the end. So often that arrogance creates sloppiness. He expected people to do what he asked of them, and he expected things to run the way he had orchestrated it. But things don't always go to plan. That's not real life. But this is also someone who's not living in a real world. He's having affairs. He's living beyond his means. So this is all psychologically very simple.
With the police having enough evidence to now arrest Standen, it was just a question of how they were going to make their move. How did it feel that day you're arresting one of your own? How was that?
Yeah, we were a little bit nervous, I guess.
We had to arrange a suitable location. We weren't keen on doing it at his desk. It was pretty serious business, arresting someone of his rank and of his, in his authority. So we coordinated it to be in their car park in the basement, under the guise of taking him out for a coffee, and we arranged that through one of his colleagues.
The arrest was actually captured by police audio surveillance.
We're here to arrest you for conspiring to import into Australia a commercial quantity of border control precursors. Do you understand that? I'll be kidding you. I'm not, mate. I'm deadly serious. Do you understand that? Yeah? No, it's not. Do you understand that? You're now under arrest. You're not obliged to say or do anything. There's anything you say or do may be given in evidence. Do you understand that? Yes, but what we're going to do now is we'll go back to the office in our car. Okay? Paul's going to put this on you. Really? Yes. Why? It's under arrest.
Did you hear he kept saying, is this a G-up?
Yeah. He thinks it's all a joke. This can't possibly be happening to me. I am above this. I am the law. I'm above this. This is absolutely beneath me for me to be actually caught and convicted for something. You've got the wrong person. He's still deluded in his head that he's going to get away with this.
His heart must be going, you know, he must be just thinking, what do they know?
It's interesting that you say his heart might be racing. I agree, it might be racing, but it's maybe more because he's angry. Not necessarily that he's feeling anxious and panicked that he's been caught, but more, how dare you think that I've done this? How dare you associate me with this? Remember, someone who's narcissistic doesn't feel remorse.
And will he be thinking, they can't have anything on me, I've covered all my tracks, they got nothing on me.
Yeah, although we know he's sloppy, but he doesn't think that he'll be caught, so he can make mistakes. And remember, he's made mistakes for a long time and nothing's happened, and deceiving people his entire life, so why would this be any different?
But his former colleagues in the Australian Federal Police were not going to let that happen.
It was mixed feelings, I guess, but by that point he'd certainly committed enough criminal acts to be treated more as a criminal suspect than as a colleague.
So we've got a senior officer drowning in debt due to gambling problems and a lavish lifestyle, getting into bed with international drug smugglers. But could the police make this cop gone bad pay for turning his back on the law? One of Australia's top cops, Mark Standen, had been arrested for conspiring to bring drugs into the country. He also had debts amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet from the moment he was arrested in June 2008, he protested his innocence. But it wasn't long before news of Mark Standen's arrest reached journalist Charles Miranda, who had been investigating Standen for months.
We put a package of stories straight away online. Now, that went on all the screens in the police centre where Mark Standen was being arrested, and it was designed to rattle him, I guess, to say, you know, you can deny all you like, but the strength of our case is represented very much by the fact that a news organisation is now publicising the fact that you've been arrested, and there's this huge conspiracy, international conspiracy.
With the theatrics of Standen's arrest over, it was now time for his police interview, and I'm keen to hear what former detective Howard Groves makes of it.
And your occupation? Assistant Director, Investigations, New South Wales Crime Commission.
He knows they've got something. They wouldn't have even arrested him if they haven't got a lot on him.
Exactly. They would have just given him some brief facts. But the mere fact that the officer asked him, what's your profession? You could see initially he was like thinking, what should I say? That would have really irked him.
Yeah, because they weren't with him.
Exactly. What's your profession? Drug dealer.
It's alleged that you conspired with Bill Gelatley and other persons to import into Australia border control precursors.
Those precursors, commonly known as pseudoephedrine, would have been used to produce the deadly street drug, crystal meth.
What can you tell me about that allegation?
Well, nothing specific in relation to any conspiracy you've brought in. That's not true.
So straight away,
he's denying it.
That's not true.
Yeah.
It sounds to, well, it looks to me, because look how chilled he is.
I would say he looks like as if he's worried. The stance, slumped in the chair, arms folded. If I'm sitting this side, I'm happy with what I'm seeing, because he's worried about something. This is not the assured professional police officer sitting there. This is somebody who's got something to worry about.
Locked up tight, Standen's singing a different tune, swearing he's clueless about the drugs, thinking he has a good chance of wriggling out of the charge because no actual drugs were found. He's quick to point the finger at Jalalati and Kinch, claiming he thought he was involved in a legitimate deal to import olive oil.
I was happy to give it a go. I was happy to do olive, the olive oil. I was happy to do all those things. I just said, just be careful. Straight, strict business, be careful. Like everybody, I can kind of see how this has panned out, see how it's gone off the rails. I can see how I look in the midst of it.
What's interesting to me, more than what he's saying, is how he's communicating. It's almost apathetic. It's like, come on, guys, you know I'm not anything to do with this. His demeanour has changed.
Is that important then? Not just the words he's saying, but how he's behaving?
Your communication is only partly the words that you speak, so his arms are folded, he's moving around, he's using low-level language. He's trying to make himself lower status, which is not usual for him. He's a high-status character. But if I lower my status, you'll see I'm innocent. Come on, what I'm giving you is really reasonable. I'm acting really reasonably. I'm going along with you. I've got nothing to hide because I'm an innocent person.
Wow. So it's just how he knows how to do all that.
He's done this his whole life. He's lied to everyone he's come into contact with. I think being finally on the other side of the fence, being sat opposite his colleagues, being questioned for a crime, would have been very, very uneasy for a character like Standen. I think he would have held out hope, though, right up until the end, that he would still get away with it. He was used to being very, very charming, very, very charismatic, maybe even being one of the lads. So I think he would have pulled on all of his resources, all of his acting skills, to try and get out of this situation that he never felt he wanted to be in.
Rather than staying silent to avoid incriminating himself, Standen still believes that he can talk his way out of it.
But he could sit there and go no comment.
Sitting and saying no comment, I'm sitting that side, I'm more than happy for him to say that. Right. Because I know the judge is going to say, his silence, you can draw an inference from that. And he knows that, so he has to say something. He doesn't want the jury to make their own assumption.
No matter how hard Standen tried to explain himself, the police had evidence to rebut every one of his arguments and excuses.
It looks worse than what it is. I know. That's the bit that I know. I also understand your perspective.
Looks a bit worse than it is. I know that.
Yeah. Well, he's just coming up with another excuse, isn't it? It's just a genuine lawful transaction I'm trying to be involved in, and it's gone horribly wrong.
I keep thinking he's sort of trying to say, look, I know I do this as a job. I know how it looks, but it isn't that.
He has been sitting on that side of the fence before. He's now on the opposite side. He knows exactly that they are not going to come and arrest him, being the top dog, in that commission office, unless they had a mountain of evidence to put him away.
The police and the prosecution felt they had enough evidence to take Mark Standen to trial. But the authorities had questions to answer about how he'd gotten away with it for so long. Philip Bradley was head of the New South Wales Crime Commission and Mark Standen's boss.
When Philip Bradley was eventually told that one of his own, one of his most trusted right-hand men, Mark Standen, was actually involved in this international conspiracy, according to those who were part of that meeting, his jaw literally dropped to the ground. He couldn't believe it.
Whilst the Crime Commission looked inwards to make sure this could never happen again, the evidence proved overwhelming when Standen reached court in March 2011.
It was a 5-month trial.
A 5-month trial? And the jury was...
They were out for half a day.
It took the jury just half a day to convict him. What does that tell you about the police work that's got into it?
Oh, they must have worked so hard to bring him to justice. The amount of evidence needed. He's a senior cop, and they have worked tirelessly trying to gather as much evidence as possible. Great piece of police work.
What was he sentenced with?
He got 22 years imprisonment.
22 years. It's a lot for a bag of rice, isn't it? Mark Standen was one of Australia's most senior police officers. He thought he was immune from justice. He took thousands from drug traffickers, but thought he was different from them. The truth is, he was a criminal, just like they are.